Hey there. Today we're diving deep into something a lot of us are interested in, learning English effectively.
Oh, yeah.
Our source material's really cool for this deep dive.
Okay.
We're going to be following the journey of Adam, a language learner who decided to take the plunge and immerse himself in English by going to London to study.
Wow.
So,
What's fascinating about Adam's story is that he gives us a real unfiltered look at the ups and downs of language learning. And trust me, there are a lot of both. I think you'll find his experiences relatable and even inspiring as we unpack his journey.
yeah, I'm with you there.
Yeah,
I remember when I was first starting out with host speakers' target language, those early days felt like a constant uphill battle.
I bet.
So let's rewind to the beginning of Adam's adventure.
Okay.
It all starts with this chance encounter on a train where he meets these two English women.
Here's where we see the power of real-world interaction. Even as a beginner, Adam managed to have a basic conversation with them. This seemingly small event lit a fire in him and solidified his desire to really master English.
It's amazing how those little unexpected moments can be such powerful motivators, isn't it?
Totally. It's like a little taste of what's possible, and suddenly you're hooked.
Yeah, you're hooked. So 6 months later, Adam decides to take the leap and heads to London for a more intensive language learning experience. He enrolls in a school, eager to just absorb everything the city and his classes have to offer.
Immersing yourself in the environment where the language is spoken is like hitting the fast forward button on your learning journey. You're surrounded by the language everywhere you go, from the streets to the shops to the pubs. It's like a constant low-key language lesson.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's where Adam's story takes a turn that I think a lot of listeners are going to find intriguing.
Okay.
His teacher has a very unconventional teaching method.
Interesting.
There are no textbooks, no rote memorization. The focus is entirely on practical usage and communication.
This approach really resonates with me. It aligns perfectly with the idea that language is at its core a tool for communication. By prioritizing speaking and listening, you're training yourself to use the language naturally and intuitively.
Right. One of the first techniques Adam's teacher introduces is the importance of reading for language acquisition.
Okay.
She recommends dedicating at least 30 minutes a day to reading material that's enjoyable and appropriate for your level.
I love that emphasis on enjoyment. It's not about slogging through a dense textbook. It's about finding books, articles, or even blog posts that you genuinely find interesting. When you're engaged with the material, the learning happens almost effortlessly.
It's like choosing a delicious meal over forcing yourself to eat something bland.
Oh, exactly. Yeah.
You absorb so much more when you're actually enjoying the process.
Definitely.
Now let's talk about another technique Adam encountered, shadowing.
Okay.
It's where you listen to a native speaker and immediately repeat what you hear.
Shadowing is incredibly powerful for multiple reasons. It not only fine-tunes your pronunciation, but also helps you internalize the rhythm and intonation of the language. Think of it like a workout for your mouth muscles. You're training them to produce the sounds of English accurately and naturally.
It's interesting you mentioned the physical aspect of pronunciation.
Yeah.
One of Adam's classmates actually experiences muscle soreness from practicing shadowing,
Wow.
which I think speaks volumes about its effectiveness. It's like you're literally rewiring your mouth to speak a new language.
Absolutely. It's a great example of how language learning involves not just your mind, but your physical body as well. Speaking of Adam's classmates, one student, Monica, shared how the thinking aloud technique drastically improved her fluency.
I'm curious to hear more about this. What exactly is thinking aloud, and how does it work?
Imagine this. Instead of translating your thoughts from your native language to English, you directly verbalize your thoughts in English. This technique helps bridge the gap between thinking in one language and speaking in another. It forces you to actively construct sentences and express yourself in real time.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like you're training your brain to think in English rather than constantly translating back and forth.
Exactly. The more you practice thinking aloud, the more natural and effortless your spoken English will become.
Now, I know grammar can be a bit of a stumbling block for many language learners.
Yeah.
They get so caught up in memorizing rules that they forget the main purpose, communication.
Right.
But Adam's teacher assures her students that grammar can be acquired naturally through consistent reading and speaking.
I think this is a reassuring message for anyone who feels intimidated by grammar. It's not about becoming a grammar expert. It's about developing a feel for the language through constant exposure and usage.
And she also makes a great point about mistakes being a natural part of the learning process.
Yeah.
In fact, she encourages her students to embrace them as opportunities to learn and grow.
I completely agree. It's so easy to get caught up in the fear of making mistakes, but that fear can hold you back from speaking freely and confidently. Embracing mistakes as valuable feedback is a crucial step in the language learning journey.
It's like learning to dance.
Yeah,
You're going to step on some toes in the beginning,
for sure.
but with practice, you'll become more graceful and confident. So we've talked about reading, shadowing, thinking aloud, and the importance of embracing mistakes. What are some other tips Adam picked up from his teacher?
Well, she shared some helpful strategies for remembering new vocabulary. She suggested using them frequently, connecting them to familiar concepts, and utilizing spaced repetition.
Spaced repetition is a concept I think a lot of our listeners might be familiar with, but perhaps they haven't fully grasped how to apply it. Could you elaborate on that a bit?
Absolutely. Spaced repetition involves reviewing material at increasing intervals. For example, you might review a new word the day you learn it, then again a few days later, then a week later, and so on. This technique takes advantage of the way our brains naturally forget information, helping us retain new words more effectively.
It's like giving your brain little reminders so those new words stick around long term.
Yeah.
What's also fascinating is that she broke down the 5 phases of learning a new word. It's something that many learners aren't aware of, but understanding these phases can really make a difference in how you approach vocabulary acquisition.
I'd love to unpack those phases in more detail. Would you like to explore that now, or should we save it for later in the deep dive?
I think it would be great to delve into those phases now as it ties in perfectly with what we've been discussing about vocabulary acquisition.
Okay, so the first phase is when you encounter a new word for the very first time. At this stage, it's just a jumble of letters. It has no meaning to you yet.
Right. It's like seeing a stranger's face in a crowd. You might glance at them, but they haven't registered in your memory yet.
Exactly. The second phase is where you start to recognize the word.
Okay.
You might see it a few times and vaguely recall that you've encountered it before, but you still can't define it or use it in a sentence.
It's like hearing a song on the radio that you think you might know, but you can't quite place it.
That's a great analogy. The third phase is when you start to understand the meaning of the word. You can now define it and possibly even use it in a simple sentence.
So at this stage, you're starting to build a connection with the word.
Right.
It's no longer a complete stranger.
Yes, and the fourth phase is where you can actively recall the word and use it confidently in various contexts.
This is where the word truly becomes part of your active vocabulary.
Yeah,
You can access it without having to think too hard about it.
precisely. And finally, the fifth phase is where the word becomes so ingrained in your memory that you no longer even remember having to learn it. It's like knowing your own name.
That's the ultimate goal, isn't it? To have such a deep understanding of the language that it feels natural and effortless.
Right.
Understanding these 5 phases is crucial because it helps learners set realistic expectations and avoid feeling discouraged when they don't immediately master every new word they encounter.
I couldn't agree more. It's a process, and understanding that process can make all the difference in your learning journey. So we've seen how Adam tackled reading and vocabulary.
Right?
But there's another crucial aspect of language learning that often trips people up:
Uh-huh.
listening.
Ah, yes, the dreaded listening comprehension. I can definitely relate to the struggle.
Oh, yeah?
For me, it was always a challenge to keep up with fast-paced native speakers. I'd get so hung up on trying to catch every single word that I'd completely miss the overall meaning.
I think a lot of learners fall into that trap. It's like trying to drink from a fire hose.
Yeah.
Adam's teacher emphasizes that the key to effective listening practice is focusing on understanding the gist,
Right.
not obsessing over every single word.
That's such an important distinction.
Yeah.
It's about getting the main idea, the overall message, rather than getting bogged down in the minutia.
Exactly. She also highlights the difference between listening to audio and watching films for language acquisition.
Oh.
When you're listening to audio, especially in the early stages, it's helpful to choose materials where you already understand most of the words. This allows you to train your ear to the sounds of the language without feeling overwhelmed.
It's like starting with a gentle warm-up before hitting the gym.
I like that analogy.
Yeah.
And with films, you have the added benefit of visual cues, body language, and facial expressions, which can aid comprehension.
It's almost like having subtitles built into the experience.
Right.
Even if you don't understand every word, you can often infer the meaning from the context.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And as your listening skills improve, you can gradually increase the difficulty level, venturing into films with more complex dialogue and faster speech. But just like with reading, consistency is key. She recommends aiming for at least 30 minutes of daily listening practice.
Okay, so we've covered reading and listening.
Right.
Now let's talk about the elephant in the room, speaking.
Okay.
This is the area where many language learners experience the most fear and hesitation.
You're absolutely right. Speaking a foreign language can be incredibly daunting, especially in the beginning. Adam initially struggled with finding the motivation to practice speaking regularly,
Uh-huh.
but then something interesting happened. He rediscovered his love for music, particularly the Beatles.
Wait, so the Beatles helped him learn English?
Yeah.
I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
Adam had been a fan of the Beatles since he was a teenager, but he'd mostly forgotten about them. As he was exploring London, he stumbled upon a Beatles-themed pub and decided to check it out. The experience reignited his passion for their music, and he started listening to their songs obsessively.
I can see where this is going. He wasn't just listening for pleasure. He was analyzing the lyrics, the pronunciation, the way they used language to create art.
You got it. The music became his gateway to the language. He started singing along, focusing on the pronunciation and intonation. He'd even try to write his own lyrics, mimicking the style of the Beatles.
That's brilliant. It's like he stumbled upon a secret weapon, a fun and engaging way to practice speaking and pronunciation without even realizing it.
It's a fantastic example of how finding something you're passionate about can unlock your motivation and accelerate your language learning journey. And it's not just about music. It could be anything: movies, TV shows, podcasts, books, even video games. The key is finding something that genuinely interests you and using it as a tool to immerse yourself in the language.
I love that message.
Yeah.
It takes the pressure off and reframes language learning as something enjoyable, not just a chore.
Yeah.
But let's face it, even with passion and motivation, there's still going to be those moments where you feel stuck,
Yeah.
especially when it comes to speaking.
Absolutely. One common challenge Adam encountered was the fear of making mistakes. His teacher had a really insightful way of addressing this. She acknowledged that it's a natural feeling, especially when you're putting yourself out there in a new language.
It's like stage fright, but with words.
Yeah,
You're suddenly in the spotlight and everyone's waiting to hear what you have to say.
exactly. She encouraged her students to shift their focus from perfection to communication. The goal is to express yourself clearly and be understood, not to sound like a native speaker overnight.
It's about progress, not perfection.
Well said. And she emphasized that most people are more forgiving of language mistakes than we think. As long as they understand the message you're trying to convey, a few grammatical errors here and there won't make a huge difference.
That's reassuring to hear.
Hmm.
Takes some of the pressure off and allows you to relax and focus on the conversation itself.
And she offered a really practical tip for those moments when you just can't seem to find the right word. Learn to describe the word you're looking for.
Ah, yes. The art of circumlocution. It's like playing a game of verbal charades.
Exactly. It forces you to think creatively and utilize your existing vocabulary to get your point across.
I remember once while traveling in host speaker's target language country, I couldn't remember the word for fork. I ended up describing it as the thing you use to stab your food. It worked, but I'm sure the waiter thought I was a bit odd.
Those moments can be a bit awkward, but they're also a testament to your ability to communicate effectively, even with limited vocabulary.
And speaking of vocabulary, one of Adam's classmates had a question I think a lot of listeners might be wondering about.
Okay.
How do you actually build up your vocabulary to that 3,000-word level or beyond? Where do you even begin?
Adam's teacher cautioned against relying solely on lists of the most frequent words. While those lists can be helpful for beginners, they present words in isolation without the context that helps us truly understand and remember them.
It's like learning a bunch of random ingredients without knowing how to combine them into a recipe.
Right.
You need the context, the application to truly make those words your own.
Exactly. She reiterated the power of reading for vocabulary acquisition. When you encounter new words within a story or article, you naturally learn their meaning and how they connect to other words.
It's like learning vocabulary organically through osmosis, rather than forcing yourself to memorize lists of isolated words.
And she shared a fascinating idea that I think might resonate with you.
Okay.
She said that every word that's important to you will come back into your life again and again until you learn it.
That's almost like a cosmic language learning conspiracy theory. But there's some truth to it, isn't there? The words we need tend to find us, especially when we're actively engaging with the language.
Absolutely. She even used the verb to Google as an example.
Right.
It's a relatively new word that most of us didn't learn from a vocabulary list. We learned it because it became relevant to our lives and we encountered it repeatedly until we understood its meaning.
It's a great example of how language evolves and how our vocabulary expands organically through real-world use.
Now let's shift gears a bit and talk about another aspect of speaking that can be quite challenging for learners. Fluency. What does it actually mean to be fluent? Adam's teacher had a very practical definition:
Okay,
speaking without long pauses.
I love that definition.
Yeah.
It's so much more attainable than the often idealized image of fluency as speaking perfectly at lightning speed with flawless grammar.
Right. It emphasizes the flow of conversation, the ability to express your thoughts smoothly and naturally without getting stuck searching for words or overthinking grammar rules.
And she made a brilliant analogy to playing a musical instrument.
Yeah.
To play the violin well, you need to train the connection between your brain and the muscles in your fingers. To speak fluently, you need to train the connection between your brain and the muscles in your mouth.
It's a beautiful way to visualize the process. It's about practice repetition and training your mouth to produce the sounds of the language effortlessly.
So it's not just about knowing the words and grammar, it's about being able to access them quickly and effortlessly during conversation.
Ah.
It's about developing that muscle memory for language.
Precisely. And she recommends speaking for at least 30 minutes a day, whether it's with a real person or through techniques like shadowing and thinking aloud.
Those techniques are like solo practice sessions for your speaking muscles.
Yeah.
You're warming up, getting your brain and mouth in sync, so when you do have a real conversation, you're ready to go.
Now, speaking of fluency, one of Adam's classmates raised an interesting point about shyness and the fear of making mistakes when speaking English.
Ah, yes, the dreaded shyness monster. It can be a real obstacle for many language learners, myself included. I remember when I first started speaking host speakers' target language in public, I felt like I was going to faint from nervousness.
It's a common feeling, but Adam's teacher had a really compassionate and encouraging way of addressing it. She shared her own experiences with shyness and emphasized that it's a natural feeling, especially when using a foreign language.
It's almost like you're putting a piece of yourself out there, making yourself vulnerable.
Right.
It takes courage to speak a new language, especially in front of others.
Absolutely. And she reminded her students that they're not alone in their struggles. Everyone feels shy or nervous at times, and it's okay to acknowledge those feelings.
It's about normalizing those feelings,
Right.
not letting them control you.
Exactly. She also emphasized that most people are more concerned with understanding your message than with judging your grammar or pronunciation.
I think that's a key point. We often overestimate how much others are scrutinizing us.
Yeah.
In reality, most people are just happy to have a conversation and connect with others.
And she offered a really powerful reminder.
Okay.
By speaking some English, you're already bringing value to those who speak the language.
It's a beautiful reframing.
Yeah.
It shifts the focus from our own perceived shortcomings to the contribution we're making by simply trying to communicate.
She also acknowledged that some people are indeed super talented at languages, but cautioned against using them as a benchmark for comparison.
I think that's crucial advice. Comparing ourselves to others is a recipe for discouragement. We all have our own unique strengths and learning styles.
Instead, she encouraged her students to recognize and embrace their own unique talents, whether in languages or other areas.
It's about celebrating our individual journeys and acknowledging that we all have something special to offer.
And speaking of journeys, Adam's time in London is coming to an end. We've seen how he's tackled reading, listening, and speaking, and how he's embraced the challenges and triumphs along the way.
Right.
But I think the biggest question on everyone's mind is,
Yeah.
has he truly transformed into a confident English speaker?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Let's take a quick pause to gather our thoughts, and we'll be back soon to reveal the final chapter of Adam's inspiring language learning adventure. All right, we're back, ready to find out what happened after Adam finished his immersive English experience in London. Did he keep it up, or did he lose it all?
I think you'll be happy to hear that Adam not only kept up his English, but actually took it even further. Remember how he rediscovered his love for music through the Beatles? That really lit a fire under him.
It sounds like that passion turned into something big. What happened?
Yeah. A year later, we see Adam not just speaking English fluently, but teaching it to others. It just shows how powerful it is to embrace what you love and use it to grow.
That's amazing. From student to teacher, I bet he had a whole new set of challenges and things he learned along the way. What was his approach to teaching?
Well, Adam started by focusing on beginners, those with a vocabulary of around 500 words.
Okay.
He felt like that was a good place to start to hone his teaching skills and get some confidence before moving on to more advanced levels. And you know what? He used his own experiences.
I bet.
He focused on those same core things that helped him: reading, listening, and speaking.
It's funny how he came back to those basic things. It shows how important they are no matter what your level is.
Totally agree. He encouraged his students to practice all three equally because they all work together and help each other out.
Yeah.
For reading, he told them to find stuff that they actually liked. Make it fun, not a chore.
That's so important. It's about making learning a part of your life something you enjoy, not something you have to do.
Right. And for listening, he said start with easy things like audiobooks or the news and work your way up to harder stuff.
Makes sense.
He even suggested watching movies and shows with English subtitles at first and
Yeah.
then getting rid of them slowly as you get better.
Little by little, just like climbing a mountain, right?
Exactly. You don't start at the top.
Yeah.
And for speaking, Adam was all about finding someone to talk with.
Oh, a language partner?
Yep. Someone at a similar level who you can chat with regularly.
That back and forth is so important. That's how you really get fluent.
But he also knew it wasn't always easy to find someone.
Right.
So he told his students to use those techniques we talked about, shadowing and thinking aloud.
Those are great when you're on your own. You can still practice talking without feeling nervous or pressured. It's so cool how Adam's journey has come full circle. He took what he learned, used it, and helped others with it.
It's a reminder that everyone can become fluent with dedication and the right approach. Adam's story is definitely inspiring, but it also shows us something really important. It's not just about getting to the end goal, it's about enjoying the whole ride.
Yeah, the ups, the downs, those aha moments, even the mistakes. And who knows, maybe Adam's story will inspire others to start their own language adventures.
I wouldn't be surprised. It shows that you can start learning at any time, and if you have the right attitude and a little passion, you can do amazing things.
Well, that wraps up our deep dive into the journey of a language learner turned teacher. We looked at some useful techniques, shared some common struggles, and hopefully got you inspired. We hope you learned something new today and maybe even feel a little more motivated to go after your own language goals. Until next time, happy learning.